On November 12, 1980, Patricia Jeschke was murdered in her St. Joseph, Missouri apartment. The man who killed her was a police officer. The St. Joseph Police Department knew within 5 weeks. They found the victim's earrings hidden in his closet. They found her credit card he had tried to use. They found his truck at the murder scene. Then they made a choice. They protected him, and they sent a 20-year-old psychiatric patient to prison instead. She would serve 43 years for a crime she did not commit. This is not a story about a confession. This is a story about a uniform. Patricia Jeschke. She was 31, a library secretary at the St. Joseph Public Library. On a Wednesday afternoon, she finished her shift, drove home in her white sports car, and was murdered in her apartment between 5 and 7 that evening. Her mother found her body the next morning. She had been beaten, bound, strangled with pantyhose, and stabbed in the head. The killer had not forced his way in. He had walked through the door. Sandra Hemme was 20 years old. She had spent 6 of the previous 8 years inside psychiatric institutions. Auditory hallucinations, multiple suicide attempts, multiple courses of electroconvulsive therapy. On the day of the murder, she walked out of St. Joseph State Hospital against medical advice at 1:05 p.m. She caught a ride from an acquaintance and traveled roughly 100 miles east toward her parents' home. She was not in St. Joseph when Patricia Jeschke was killed. 2 weeks later, after an unrelated psychiatric crisis, Sandra Hemme was back inside the same state hospital, restrained, sedated with Haldol and chloral hydrate. That is where the police came to find her. They would interrogate her 8 times. By the end, she would confess to a murder she did not commit. And the man who actually killed Patricia Jeschke would still be wearing his badge. On December 18, 1980, the St. Joseph Police Department opened a fraud investigation against one of their own. Officer Michael Holman had reported his white Ford pickup truck stolen and collected a $4,350 insurance payout. The truck was not stolen. His training partner had seen it. And that truck matched the vehicle witnesses had described parked outside Patricia Jeschke's apartment the evening of the murder. The sketch had been shown at every police roll call for weeks. The day after the murder, Patricia Jeschke's credit card had been used at a Kansas City camera store. The clerk identified the customer. It was Officer Holman. He claimed he had found her purse in a ditch. On December 22nd, officers searched Holman's home. Inside, they found 2 jewelry boxes that his wife said she had never seen. Patricia Jeschke's father came to the station. He picked up a pair of wishbone-shaped earrings with a small green stone. He had bought them in Montana in the early 1960s and given them to his daughter. He was certain. By that point, the FBI had already analyzed 2 black hairs recovered from Patricia Jeschke's bed. They were microscopically consistent with Officer Holman. The truck, the credit card, the earrings, the hair on the bed. 4 independent pieces of evidence pointing at the same officer. 4 days after the search of Holman's home, the investigation against him stopped. Police Chief James Robert Hayes removed the detective who had concluded Holman was the killer. The case against the officer went dark, and the case against Sandra Hemme moved forward. Sandra Hemme had given police 8 different statements. She named a man named Joe Wabsky, who turned out to have been locked inside a Topeka detox facility the night of the murder. She described a white cat. Patricia Jeschke had a dog. She described a graduation photo on the wall. No such photo existed. She described a mahogany television on legs. There was none. She told detectives she knew about the murder because of, quote, ESP. She was, at every interrogation, on Haldol, on chloral hydrate, in leather wrist restraints, suffering muscle spasms from an adverse drug reaction. The lead detective himself eventually stepped aside, telling his colleagues he was not getting the truth. Then on December 10th, 1980, 2 other detectives took her confession. She confessed alone. By that point, the police had already shown her crime scene photographs and walked her through Patricia Jeschke's apartment for 6 hours without medical supervision. In April 1981, while Hemme was being processed through a guilty plea, Officer Holman cut a deal of his own. He pleaded guilty to insurance fraud. His plea agreement included a clause. The state would not, quote, prosecute me for any other criminal matters now under investigation. The lead prosecutor would later testify that this clause foreclosed any murder prosecution. By contract, the state of Missouri had made it impossible to charge Patricia Jeschke's killer. In June 1985, Sandra Hemme stood trial. The trial lasted 1 day. The prosecutor told the jury her confession contained details only a killer would know. He did not tell the jury that detectives had given her every one of those details. She was convicted. She was sentenced to life. Michael Holman died, a free man, in 2015. This was not the first time the St. Joseph Police Department had extracted a confession from a vulnerable patient at the state hospital. The year before Patricia Jeschke was murdered, in 1978, a 4-year-old boy named Eric Christgen was killed. The department interrogated another patient, Melvin Lee Reynolds. He was also mentally ill. He also falsely confessed. He served 4 years before a serial killer named Charles Hatcher pleaded guilty to the murder. 2 of the detectives who worked on Reynolds also worked on Sandra Hemme. The same hospital, the same playbook, the same kind of victim. The pattern was not a mistake. It was a method. And when Judge Ryan Horsman granted Sandra Hemme's habeas petition in June 2024, his 118-page ruling found something else. The St. Joseph Police Department had hidden everything. The earrings report, the FBI palm print that excluded Hemme, the FBI fingerprint analysis that found 71 prints on a magazine from her, none from the victim, undercutting the prosecution's story about the magazine's origin, the hair analysis, the truck, the alibi that motel records had disproven. The Missouri Court of Appeals later wrote, unanimously, that the police, quote, ignored and buried evidence coming into its possession. Patricia Jeschke's killer was never prosecuted. Sandra Hemme served 43 years. 2 women, 1 cover-up. Here is what I keep coming back to. A police officer was caught with the victim's earrings in his closet, with her credit card, with his truck at the scene, with his hair on her bed. Any one of those would put a civilian under indictment within a week. He got an immunity contract, and the department spent the next 43 years protecting that decision by keeping a woman in prison. The story Verdict Flipped is built on is the story of how power chooses who is expendable. Sandra Hemme was a 20-year-old psychiatric patient with no family wealth, no political weight, and a medical record full of words like delusional. Michael Holman had a badge. Patricia Jeschke had been murdered. And once the police chief decided which one of them to protect, both women lost. Sandra Hemme walked out of prison on July 19, 2024. Her father died 10 days later. He had been waiting. If the St. Joseph Police Department had followed the evidence in 1980, Patricia Jeschke's killer would have stood trial. Sandra Hemme would have lived her life. Who do you think benefited from the version they told? On this channel, we don't just accept the official story. If you want to keep flipping the script on the cases the whole world got wrong, subscribe to Verdict Flipped. There's always another side to the truth. See you Saturday.